Perceptiveness is a concept which is emanated from the thought on change. Change being so predominantly prevalent in the society and the organization, various organizations, particularly business organizations, and I think it comes as an inevitable trait that a leader needs to possess. Now, when we talk about change, we're talking about a different kind of leadership. We're not talking about a transactional leader who is able to manage the routine. We're talking about a transformational leader who's a visionary, who is resilient, who's adaptable, and who can take a team forward like even the transactional leader does. But then if a leader is a visionary and he has to set a direction to his team, is to take his team forward, it has to be essentially with a lot of empathy. Now, empathy with the team. A lot has been already worked, or a lot has been said about empathy, because worldwide research has been made about empathy. What has been lesser said about is perceptiveness. So I thought that this was one of the areas that we could dwell upon and we could talk about it. Incidentally, when thinkers have been talking about leadership, and leadership which is more pertinent in today's environment, it's sort of merged with what has been said about leadership in the past. So a lot of traits and the qualities of leaders have been repeated. And the qualities of a transformational leader are also highlighted, but nothing so far as perceptiveness. A lot has been said about empathy, as I said earlier. Research has been done across the world, Germany, England, US, but perceptiveness has always been ignored, whereas perceptiveness is the cue to building empathy. What inspired me actually, and who inspired, are basically inseparable questions. I actually was initially consulting for small companies, and then I had this very ardent desire of becoming a trainer. And I used to train when I was in employment, but after having started consulting work, I was not much into training. So when I started training, I realized that more introspection was required on the part of participants. When they were trying to imbibe knowledge or skills, they also needed to understand why they needed that knowledge and why they needed those skills. And that is where the administration of psychometric testing came in. Psychometric testing incidentally gives rise to a lot of introspection, and that is when I was groping around to look for good psychometric tests, and that is when I came across Professor Udai Pareek's book called Training Instruments, and then I looked at those tests and I said, wow, what thinking and what understanding of the society. So then eventually I wanted to learn more about Professor Udai Pareek, and I found that although he had kept a very low profile for himself, but he was an ocean of knowledge. And when I looked at his test called Personal Effectiveness Scale, he discussed the concept of perceptiveness there, and that is where I got inspired. And I still look at Professor Udai Pareek as my guru. I think I should talk about this process with an example from a real life situation. It dates back to the time when I was going to school for the first time, and my sister took me to school. And while she was talking to the principal, Brother Puneet, in those days, I was actually looking around. I saw colorful glasses all around me, and I was trying to identify the different colors, because a lot of impact or attraction is towards colors at that age. So while I was looking around, and I was totally away from the actual conversation that was taking place between my sister and Brother Puneet. But at the same time, while I was away, I was not oblivious to the fact that they were conversing. And I was very sure that they were talking about something very serious, and it concerned my admission to school. So this awareness of not being directly attentive to, yet knowing that something serious was going on while I was preoccupied with something else, is a typical example of perceptiveness. I think all great writers, the great authors like Ernest Hemingway or Jaishankar Prasad in Hindi literature, they have all been very, very perceptive, and that's why they could write such beautiful things. When I talk about Jaishankar Prasad, if you refer to the book Puraskar, he talks about the wetness of the environment, the rainy season. All he means is the rainy season. But the way he describes it, he calls it the Ardra Nakshatra. The Ardra Nakshatra means, Ardra means wet, Nakshatra means the sky. So, all I'm saying is he was alert, he was attentive to what was happening, and then that was getting reflected, that was getting portrayed in what he was writing. Similarly, Ernest Hemingway in his book Old Men and the Sea, he's talking about the flying fish. He's talking about the whir of the fish. And while he's all alone at sea, they say that this is Ernest Hemingway's own story. But nevertheless, whatever be the fact, he was absolutely conscious to the fact, while rowing the boat, while being steady in the midst of the sea, he was still able to hear so many things that were happening around him. And that is perceptiveness. That is the process, how you get into perceptiveness. I think we should now talk about the structure, what builds perceptiveness and what essentially are the ingredients. So if we look at the factors which go into perceptiveness, I think the first thing that comes to a human being that is able to build his perceptiveness is his sensitivity. How sensitive is he to situations? How sensitive is he towards his surroundings? So, sensitivity is the first essential prerequisite for building perceptiveness. And then, having had that quality with you, I think what you need to build on is attention. How attentive you are, how focused you are, how less do you get distracted with things. That is the second part. Sensitivity then goes on to building your attention, where you have to consciously work on building your attention. And eventually it comes to awareness and consciousness. So once you get used to this, the sensitivity factor, you get used to the attention factor, what automatically comes to you is your consciousness and your awareness. Awareness of your surroundings, awareness of people around you, awareness of what's one small sound there, awareness of what's happening behind you. What's important is to get to know what is happening behind you. As a transformational leader, this is extremely important. It's very interesting that, way back in 1995, Daniel Goleman wrote this book, Emotional Intelligence. And when we read that book initially, we overlooked certain things. We always thought that he spoke about another dimension of intelligence, and which was connected to emotions, of course. But then, if you look at his model, he specifically mentions about the moving from self-awareness to self-management to social awareness to interpersonal management. So what I'm trying to pinpoint here is not his theory, but I'm trying to depict the fact that self-awareness and social awareness, both are mentioned here in his theory, but both are areas which are related to perceptiveness. If you are perceptive about yourself, you're a better manager for your own self. You manage yourself better. Your self-discipline comes in better. Which eventually takes you to social awareness. If you better managed yourself, you obviously know what's happening around you. Who are the people, how they would react, etc., etc. So having known that, I think what you need to look at, or how you move, the area that you move into from becoming socially aware, you develop on your interpersonal ability. Because if I have to interact with you, for instance, I would have to know what is your reaction to certain areas. And that I can predict, or I can understand only if I am perceptive about your behavior. So, the point I'm trying to make here is, Daniel Goleman is one of his model is one of the basic clues to which can to the concept of perceptiveness. Let me share with you that I had the opportunity of visiting Martin Vikramasinghe's museum in Sri Lanka. And I found that this gentleman had done so much of research around for his surroundings, and he also studied anything that was connected to his surroundings. So he not only researched about what was happening around him or the environment around him, but he also got into the culture which influenced his surroundings. And therefore he did a lot of research in Sanskrit, in Sinhala, and connected cultures. And he looked at the artifacts, he developed his theories, his understanding about what was happening around him, how the Sinhala culture grew from all these studies that he made. And that could come about only because he was perceptive. He was perceptive to his surroundings. He was perceptive to what actually led to all this happening and why is the Sinhala culture what it is today. And it's immensely informational, immensely informing. If you ever happen to visit, you'll find that he's done a lot of work, and that he could do. He was able to do it because of his perceptiveness. The other example is that of Qazi Nazrul Islam in Bangladesh. I had the opportunity of going through his life history, and I found that he had a very, very unfortunate childhood where he lost his father very early. He had to work for keeping his family going, and he also had to serve as a cook at times, and also he served as a muezzin in the Islamic institutions. But all this, I think, were only contributory factors of making him what Qazi Nazrul Islam eventually became. But the basic ingredient, the basic understanding, or the basic quality that this person had was his perceptiveness. Had he not been through all this rigmarole or the processes that he went through, he wouldn't have imbibed so much of experience, and his perceptiveness towards all these happenings and situations made him what he was. I think all of us know that Qazi Nazrul Islam was one of those poets and writers who never was a fundamentalist. He never spoke about Islam. He always saw a merger of Hinduism and Islam. And it was a beautiful feeling that he evolved, and he left all of us with a beautiful feeling that everything leads to one particular God, and the spirituality with which he actually wrote towards the end of his life. I think it was all because he was extremely perceptive, and he could become that because of the experiences he had, but the experiences were only a complementary factor. Basically, the person was extremely perceptive. With all these examples that I just cited, I think basically what I would like to take you back to what I initially had suggested, that it is your sensitivity, your attention, and eventually your consciousness. So how sensitive these people were to their situations was important. How attentive they were, and that was filtered attention. It was not attention of all kinds. It was filtered attention, therefore very focused attention on certain aspects, certain situations, certain people. And growing out of that, they built their awareness, their consciousness. And that is what actually perceptiveness is all about. And that is why these great men were all perceptive people. There's this famous writer on leadership, and he writes about transformational leadership. So his name is Doug Blackie, and he has been talking about consistency in leadership. And he's talking about consistency not only in terms of what he's doing, but consistency in terms of his vision, consistency in terms of his attention, consistency in terms of everything that he conceives also. What is important here is the word consistency. So if you have to build perceptiveness, you have to be consistently at it. It's a question of practice. How do you feel the day you have not brushed your teeth? It leaves you with a very, very awkward feeling, because you are so accustomed to brushing your teeth every morning that it leaves you with a very pungent feeling if you don't do it. So it's a question of practice. If you are a perceptive person, you will not miss anything. But if you're not, and if you get accustomed to, you want to get accustomed to perceptiveness, then you have to build that practice. A perceptive person, on the contrary, will miss out the fact that he has not been perceptive, and he'll keep on lamenting the fact that he has missed out on something. So that's where the clue lies. You have to be constantly practicing it. I think taking the clue of what I just cited about brushing your teeth every morning. Why do you do it? Because right since childhood, our parents have been telling us to do that, and we start feeling the absence or missing out on it if we miss one day, and we are left with a bad taste. But the basic point here is practice, and practice leading to a habit. So it's actually your conscious attention, you're sensitized to a certain thing, and then with the help of your attention, you filtered attention again, you build that consciousness, your awareness. Similarly, in an organization, a leader, a transformational leader, has to be sensing everything that is happening around him. In the marketplace, inside the organization, how people are behaving within the organization, how the customer is reacting, what is the competitor doing in the marketplace. The leader has to be, as a practice, get into the understanding consistently on what is happening everywhere, in all quarters. And that is how organizational perceptiveness is built. We are talking about perceptiveness in regard to the transformational leader. So that's why I'm mentioning this. I think we need to talk about the second aspect now. The first aspect was, as I said, you have to develop a habit. The second aspect of it is how you can, spread your attention to more than one thing. And you have to constantly keep abreast with all the different aspects that you are paying attention to. Take the example of a mother. She cooks. Now, you never had burnt bread to eat at the end of the day. You never had burnt, overcooked. The gravy was never thick, not too thick or not too, light to eat. It was always the kind of taste that we wanted to have. So, there are multiple things that she was doing in the kitchen before it was actually served on a plate in the form of a lunch or a dinner. So what actually happens was that she was dividing her attention over not just one thing, but over so many things, and the house was also kept clean at the same time. So the lesson that we learn from here is that in an organization there are so many things happening. The leader cannot afford to just stay focused onto one thing and ignore the others. So the second habit that he needs to build in order to build this perceptiveness that we are talking about, he needs to be a multi-skilled person, a multi-dimensional person, and his attention has to be focused or equally distributed in a diverse number of activities. This is in the organizational context that we are talking now. Let's take the example of a situation where the organization is confronted with a very serious issue of the customer coming back to tell the organization that the quality is not up to the mark. And it has been found that you have serious problems with maintenance, you have serious problems with the logistics facing a strike, and you have other issues, the workers not competent to put in the best. Eventually what happens is if it is a transactional leader with not so much of perceptiveness, he would act as a problem solver. He would jump into the fray, he would actually try to make things hunky-dory before the customer arrives to make that final inspection. But in the case of a perceptive transformational leader, he would foresee all these things happening. He would be, since he's multidimensional, since he's also as a means of habit, he is used to knowing things in advance. He has the premonition all the time with him to understand what's going to happen. He probably would not let such things happen. And even if it does happen, it will be probably in much lesser number of areas, not so many areas he would let the problems grow. And therefore, the chances of the customer arriving and not seeing the problems, the remnants of the problems in the organization is much more than a transactional leader with lesser amount of perceptiveness. I think it is very important for all youngsters to be self-disciplined. That's very important. It's not the imposed discipline that we're talking about. It's not the regimented discipline that we're talking about. It's the evolved discipline. So you have to evolve your personality into a kind of a person who is self-disciplined. It doesn't call for outside discipline at all. Nobody has to talk about discipline. He has to be a very good time manager. That's very important. If he is a time manager, that's an indication that his self-discipline is of him. So I think as a habit, he has to continuously. There's no best time manager because there's always a room for improvement. So he'll have to continually work towards becoming a better time manager. That's one aspect. The other thing is that I think people should be awake to every. The five senses of a human being should be activated all the time. You can't put any of the, unless you're very tired, you can't put your any of your senses to rest, any of your senses to sleep. when you are activated. And as a transformational leader, you just can't afford to do that. So if you want to become a transformational leader, the younger entrepreneurs, I think need to develop these two things. One, practice of self-discipline, better time management, and the other is the awakening of all the five senses at all times. Thank you.